Welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Comedy on Power Talk, thank you so much for making us part of your day today. And before I hit the road to go see some burning spiritual communal music, I get a chance to speak to a cat who put in the time on the bandstand and really, because of that, in so many recordings and in live performances, he's playing very complex music. In some cases, it's odd-metered music, and yet he pulls it off in a very fluid and flawless way. And really, the element, to me, in my mind, the definition of genius is being able to do something that's incredibly difficult and make it look very easy. And he's still doing it today. Looking forward to getting into it again. Ralph Humphrey, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thanks, Jake. Thanks for having me again.
It's an honor. You know, I wanted to start with this audio clip. It's a Name That Voice. It's a take a listen to the content, and then we'll come back and break it down.
Okay.
In 1980, 81,
Right.
the synthesizer entered the pop music world, and it was the new toy. And every track was synthesizers on every tune. The drummers, Harvey Mason, people like that, they were making their money from programming drum machines. Okay?
Are you kidding me?
I am not kidding.
Wait,
you.
hold on. I want to be clear. You mean somebody would come and have them play the drum beats, and then that drum machine would be on the record?
There were drum machines.
The Lynn drum machine, yeah.
They were drum machines, and those guys learned how to work those machines.
So then a session,
and so Harvey and a bunch of other really great drummers learned how to work drum machines, and they were putting drum machine tracks on pop records and some of the fusion records because that was the sound of the day. Let me continue.
Please.
The bass thing ended up being keyboard bass for a while. All of the string stuff became synthesized. All of the brass stuff became synthesized. And I would go to a record date. You couldn't sample a saxophone sound. It's got too many overtones in it. It's too weird. Yamaha wanted to synthesize my sound. They wanted to put my sound in one of their synthesizers, and they were going to give me a fee, but they weren't going to give me royalties. They wanted to pay me a flat fee to synthesize my sound and put it in one of their computers. But they only wanted to pay me one time, and they didn't want to pay me royalties, and they were going to take my sound.
Right. This is unbelievable. I'm sorry to hit you with such a heavy thing. I can see that you're nodding in agreement. And do you know who that voice is?
It sure sounds familiar to me.
Saxophone cat, and
saxophone player. I'm blanking on his name, but I think I know who it is. Tell me who it is.
It's Ernie Watts.
I was going to say it sounded like Ernie Watts.
Exactly. And so Ernie has put me into the stratosphere with his brilliance and his knowledge, and the guy was obviously, an incredible player. And but I really want you to talk about first just addressing the psycho-spiritual component, how you felt personally when this era of synthetic music started to infiltrate pop music and then really into a whole bunch of different kinds of music. And then, so start with that and then talk about, I have to believe that you must have been programming drum machines as well.
Well, I was actually not programming drum machines. I was using synthesized elements particularly in film music, not necessarily on records. Um, I was pretty busy with television and motion picture work during that time, and when the synthesized craze hit, of course, it was the Lynn drum machine, the DMX Oberheim drum machine, Sin drums,
Yes.
and the like, Lynn drums. Oh, anyhow, yeah, I was. It was almost as if you didn't join this group, you were not going to work, and so you were almost required to get involved in it. I was using Yamaha drums at the time, since 1974, and of course they had their own version of synthesized drums using FM synthesis, which they put in their DX7, which was of course a huge hit at the time. And so I was working with Yamaha to develop some synthesized FM drum sounds to use for tracking, for interesting sounds on film scores, etc. And then along came samplers, so that you could actually sample your own sounds, other sounds that were available. And then there were a lot of companies that were creating sample sets, like like Ernie said, bass, keyboard, strings, brass, drums, you name it. There were a lot of drummers who were programming for companies for a fee, like Ernie said. But back end, forget it. There was going to be no back end.
Right. That's yeah. Go ahead. Continue.
I thought I'm not going to do that. That's selling me for a really cheap price. They can use it over and over and over again. So I didn't go that route, and I didn't like guys that were going that route either. But hey, we all have to make a living somehow. So my use of those elements were mostly in TV and film scoring, where now I wasn't scoring, I was performing on film, where the requirement was you better have your electronics together and know how to program in the studio, how to create sounds, all that sort of thing. So I found it kind of interesting because I don't know. I got to figure out how to do it, at least with the Yamaha gear and the other stuff I was using.
I mean, can you talk about, I guess specifically, like, I remember talking to the late great Joe Porcaro, and he was, he literally was talking about doing percussion in this, before, well, in the 70s, and it was like, literally the cats were like playing to us to the screen, to the actual movie itself. They were playing to the scenes and trying to get the tempos together, but it was all people. It was all human heartbeats. It was human beings. And you look at pictures of a Lalo Schifrin date, and there's like a 30-piece string section. I mean, it's really quite insane. So, but can you talk about at that time, 1980? It was really the beginnings of sort of the visual television revolution to a degree. Mm-hmm. Sitcoms, TV shows, like you were saying, there were budgets, right, for human heartbeats. Is that right? I mean, can you talk about, I love how you didn't sell out to this idea of like your sound being sampled all over the place. What kind of sonic things were you using from the electronic bag? And can you give an example, like in what kind of show or in a particular movie, like what would you use?
Well, I had a rack of gear, which included the DX816, which was 8 modules of DX7s. And from that, I was getting drum sounds that I was mixing with other things, other boxes, and then effects on those things for television. Star Trek, for example, the TV show Star Trek. Dennis McCarthy, I worked for him a lot on that show. And, you had to create effects on the date, effects that were not really written in specifically on the part. For example, Dennis would have little iconic signature statements like he would use ERS or electronic rhythmic shit, and he the click would be there, and
Right.
he would leave it to me to create not only the sound, but the effect on the sound, whether it was echo, delay, chorusing, whatever. And so there was actually freedom, a lot of freedom sometimes with me in what I was going to create. And I had I generally used a pad setup where I could trigger my sounds. So I was actually able to play the sounds as opposed to punching keys and things like that. And so I had them all set up, and each setup was a little bit different for every session. But yeah, it became a requirement that if you were getting called for a date, they would probably say, bring your drums and bring your electronics. And whether you used them or not, they wanted them there. Now, the good thing about all of that was a lot of us were making a lot of money on rentals of our gear. And so when you had a keyboard player coming in with 3 racks and stacks of keyboards and whatnot, they were easily making $500
Wow.
just on rentals. And then the cartage company was making a great taste too, because they had to bring all that stuff. And you can imagine the wires and everything that had to go into that, and then connecting to the console, in the studio. It was quite daunting, and it took time to get sounds up and make sure you had signal and all that sort of thing. And if there were any delays in the studio, it usually was about the electronics not working or something happening that broke down. And it could be frustrating, especially if it was your gear, because now okay, what's happening with your gear, Ralph?
Right. You got the scarlet letter on your.
Exactly. So I kind of had to know everything that was going on with my rack, and be able to troubleshoot on the spot in case something went wrong. So there was that, and a lot of times you would sync to a SMPTE, which was the code that was sent to the instrument. So you were actually locked into the SMPTE code with your electronics. So if you had to follow the click, your electronics would follow the click. It was very interesting, and all this was done kind of on the session.
That's the so I really need to. I really do you have a memory of one of the first times where you showed up and you didn't bring your electronic, like you forgot them, or they were like, go, I really, this is the infancy of it is innocent and cool. And I just want you to take me through that.
Yeah. Well, that was, you would get a call from the answering service saying, okay, here's the call. Can you accept? Yes, I'll accept. Okay, here's what you need to bring. And they would always list what you need to bring. And so if it included electronics, they would say, bring your electronics. And so I would make sure that they were always there. And I would always, arrive at the date quite early, because I wanted to make sure everything was working and that the booth was getting signal okay. And then again, each chart that came up, I wasn't really knowing what I was going to be required to set up that, but it was in that moment that I had to create something that was going to work. I was also triggering my drums with some of these sounds. So this is the, placed right on the instrument, and you were always concerned with getting the right signal and having no delay, because there's always a little bit of MIDI delay in some of these things. So you wanted to make sure that your hit was right on the money. So I had a good sampler at the time that was quite good. So
what was it called? What was that sampler?
Oh God!
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to stretch you out. That's
the Forad F16.
Oh, whoa!
Do you know what that is?
I mean, I know. It's just. I mean, what was that, like 79 or 76?
Yeah, around there.
Yeah.
So I was dealing with the actual creators of that instrument, and I was able to grab one, and so it was a great triggering device, because each trigger was individual. So I had a module for the snare drum, I had a module for the kick drum, etc. and so yeah, I was doing triggering. So it was combined with my own drum set. So
So I just want to sort of get it in my own like head, the visual part of it. Like, you had complete creative control when, like, the Star Trek producer would write electronic rhythmic S, right? And
yeah,
then it was really like you could kind of just the floor. You could create whatever you wanted. If he didn't like it, he'd say do something else.
right, exactly. If he didn't like the sound, he'd say, is there something else that might work better?
Yeah.
And maybe it was the sound was clashing with other things. Maybe it was just inappropriate. But rarely did he actually come back and say, "That's not the right sound." He really let me do it,
I love it. I freaking
and
love it.
I had the good musical ability to pick a sound that was going to work, and to do something to it that was working with the track.
Now this was essentially how much actual, because we talked last time about you were on the bandstand. Was the Dick Crest band? You were playing a solo every night. So many different stories. Playing with humans in those sound or in those shows, or when you were putting together the music for it. Were there actual times where everybody was hitting together like a traditional session?
Oh yeah, everybody was in the room, full orchestra.
Full orchestra.
Oh yeah, strings, horns, percussion. I was a percussionist, and keyboards, synthesizers, etc. So we would do, the recording of the episode all together, and so everything was in real time. I didn't come in early and put my stuff down, or come in later and do my stuff. It was in the moment.
Yeah, no, I guess what I'm saying is, like, you guys would go through and all hit at the same time, but then you'd get that ERS stuff and you do that sometime during, not when everybody was hitting live.
No.
No,
I was
you were doing it on the fly. You had to do that.
Oh yeah,
That's pressure.
it's a lot of pressure.
Holy cow.
Yeah, to get the right sound, to make sure your gear is working, to be musical, because I was creating stuff, and I was creating rhythms, and it was working with the whole ensemble, and it was quite interesting, and I really kind of enjoyed it, actually.
No, I mean, it's so interesting to hear that. I mean, also you got a bunch of people sort of just waiting on you to, get that together. Like you needed to have your stuff together. Were there, it's so interesting. It just popped into my head, going back to talking to guys like Louis Shelton. I mean, it was, when Bill Putnam and some of these other, Tommy Tedesco, Barney Kessel, when rock music came in, and sort of that shift towards fusion or whatever, that was the end of their studio careers. They were gone. They didn't really, it was just a new breed of cats that were coming in. I'm talking about guitar players specifically.
Sure.
Is it, without mentioning names, did the, I don't want to say purists, but the people that were ambivalent about learning the technology and also truly believed in the idea of, and had been ensconced with just human interaction, did a lot of cats drop out of the studio scene at that time, or at least some?
Yeah, they did. If you didn't embrace technology for whatever reason, it did affect your job load. Now, you mentioned Tommy Tedesco. Tommy was one of those musicians who was liked by everybody, particularly, composers and producers. And so he would still arrive on a lot of shows, even if he wasn't an electronic wizard. He was able to give them what they wanted.
He was also he was part of the original Wrecking Crew, so he definitely had some cred,
Oh, a lot of credit, yeah. A lot of those guys did, yeah. But no, I think that there was some attrition that happened because guys, failed to sign on to this new era of technology and whatnot, especially in film and TV. Records, yeah, the records were, like you said, synthesizer was part of everything at that point, including, drum programming and et cetera, et cetera. I didn't do a lot of drum programming on records. I played drums on records.
Hmm.
So I didn't go that route over there. I went on that route for film and TV.
So you never had like one of these chips where they would consistently use that beat, like Harvey Mason. That's what Ernie was basically saying, was that he'd program different beats, and then based on what was called for, they'd insert that into a.
Yeah.
You weren't, and I'm not sure if he got royalties for that, but you were like, I'm not. That part of it, that went too far for you.
Yeah, I didn't get involved in that part at all, and no, I was never really offered the opportunity to do it, and so that's one reason why I didn't do it. But I think if I had been offered, I probably would have said no, because the return just wouldn't make any sense. And then I'm out there, and then they can use me now whenever they want, and I'll never get called to do those sessions. So that's kind of how I felt about it all.
It's interesting. I'm curious about like how during that time, jazz, whatever that means to you, and to means different stuff to everybody. But I mean, the sort of authentic, acoustic, sort of burning, playing the songbook but taking it out or whatever. Even Don Ellis stuff, whatever. Like, how did synthetic music, synthesizers, recreating an acoustic bass, and I'm talking like as we got into the 80s, technology developed even more. There was a lot of overkill, How did it affect like the sound of, in your mind, the best thing about records to me up to a certain point is just how visceral it is. You listen to Nick Ceroli and, it's like, it's just popping. It's just, there's no, and you know what I'm saying? So, I mean, how, in your mind, how did it affect the aesthetics? I noticed by the 80s, with a jazz record, very little percussion was being used. Not saying that there was a lot of, but I'm just curious about how you think it affected the tonality of this sort of acoustic music.
Well, you can call, what happened in the 80s like soft jazz or new age or whatever. That was an era that I'm really sorry that, jazz, quote unquote, got watered down to try to meet, the folks out there who bought records, and it was kind of a dumbing down of what we call jazz. But maybe it was supposed to happen because everything was going in that direction. And again, people were trying to make a living and sell records. And so they were trying to reach as many people as they could. And so, you found these sort of, regular beats and whatnot, and the lack of stretching and going for it wasn't there anymore. Solos were tailored down to meet a specific kind of a thing.
It was called the efficiency model or something like that,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
That is so. Can you just even though you played drums, were producers like, just play straight beats, don't play yourself, just play straight beats, like we just want what the last hit. To me, like that fundamental. I mean, I am obviously an idealist or whatever I am, but it's like, and I realize, making a living, but it's like, when you say dumbing down, do you have an example of dumbing down?
Oh, well, geez.
Just the idea of saying, well, we don't need we don't need Al McKibben, or we don't need, an upright cat. We can just program it in. Because what you're talking about is, in essence, selling records to a populace who was getting dumbed down. To me, that was the issue.
Yeah, to me, what disturbed me was what we call, sit down, listen music got dumbed down.
Yes.
Because, these artists or producers or record companies were interested in sales, and so they were looking at what was selling in the marketplace, and it unfortunately hit, what I call, jazz, and changed it. Fusion is a result of, a lot of this, but there's different kinds of fusion. There's Mahavishnu Orchestra fusion and Chick Corea fusion, and then there's, fusion that is definitely. Do I want to really sit and listen to this? Because it's not my kind of music.
I dig, man. No, there's a lot of fusion, man. I mean, it's just a blending of different genres. So of course there is, and there's going to be some stuff that's like, this is not what I want to listen to.
Yeah, and so a lot of it was again trying to make it palatable for the general public. Bring on new people because maybe it was called jazz, but it really was not really bebop jazz, or where you get a chance to stretch and really play from the heart. So you're a lot of what I did was what I would call job oriented. There were sessions when I could be myself and creative, and then there were sessions where I had to sort of play a part. Whether it was disco or something else, something for TV. Make it sound like this. There was a lot of that, and I didn't mind doing that because I was getting paid for it.
Absolutely.
So, but I made a difference. There was always a difference for me between when I could be more creative and when I couldn't be creative. And it was okay because I was working, and people hired me because I could do that. I could read well, I could fit in, I could do the job. I had the right sounds and electronics if they needed it. So, yeah, I think during that time we were, it was a busy time, especially for those who sort of got on the train, and and I was one of them. And again, I don't regret a lot of the music that I played, even though I don't listen to it or would never want to listen to it again, because I was doing a job.
No, you were getting paid. I dig it. Now, who? Couple questions. Who were some of the? I mean, there wasn't like, there weren't. You couldn't necessarily take classes in electronic drum creation. Who were some of the cats? I mean, I know Michael Boddicker, but he was more of a synth guy.
He's a synth guy. Yeah.
But I mean, who did you kind of pick their brain early on to sort of figure out like how to get your stuff together? Unless you just picked it up, unless you're just like an avatar and you just learned it right away.
Well, again, I mean, I don't call myself an electronic whiz guy, but I did spend a lot of time at Yamaha, and they helped me out a lot.
Really interesting
with their whole thing. And then I'm trying to recall if I got some information from anybody else. I kind of put it together myself. My setup was a little bit different than a lot of people's. So it wasn't I was trying to match somebody else. So the Yamaha, and then the 4-at F16, and then a couple of other drum boxes with basically samples and whatnot, and then your basic effects and all that sort of thing, and a mixer, and the whole thing. That's kind of what I did for my rack. And I guess there is one guy that I did pick his brain. His name is David Krieger.
Interesting. Who is he still around?
Oh yeah, David. Oh, around.
Dude, so you picked. Now, why did you pick his brain?
Because he was one of the first guys that got into this, and he did. There was a series of things that he produced.
Wow.
One of the first guys, was it? What was it called? Drum loops or drum something?
Oh, drum drops. Drum drops, maybe? Yeah.
Drum drops.
Oh my god, dude, those albums are so wickedly funky, man. I mean, a lot of breaks on it. Yeah.
Well, he was.
Wow, dude,
he was good at that. So I picked his brain for sure. He gave me some advice on how to put my rack together. In fact, I think he helped me wire my first rack. So that's something I didn't know how to do, and so he was able to help me out a lot there with. Here's how things go. Here, you got to make sure that this is happening here and this is happening there. And if you need to plug in anything, here's where you plug it in. And so, yeah, I mean, David helped me out a lot.
Let me ask you, did you, did you wind up in any live touring situations where you had to bring your rig with you?
No.
And what kind of touring
Well,
were you?
I
Oh,
tell you what. No, let me go back.
oh boy,
When I was with Free Flight, that was in the '80s.
sure.
I do recall having some ability to trigger from some pads as part of the experience of playing in Free Flight. It wasn't a lot of it, but I wanted to emulate some of the stuff that we did on records, where I did use some synthesized sounds, and so yeah, that's probably the only group that I did that with.
What kind of was the did you have? Can you talk a little bit about the live touring that you did in the '80s? I mean, you were so busy in the '70s,
Yeah.
and even today. I mean, we can get into that later, but it's like there still is like some kind of live touring circuit. And like you said, the 80s, people that got on the train, it was still a busy time in the studios. But who did you tour with in the 80s?
Well, Al Jarreau for one.
Beautiful.
That was in the early '80s.
With Paul Stallworth on bass or somebody else?
No, Derek Jackson was the bass player that I played with, and Tom Canning, the original player.
Tom Canning, man. Still waiting for him to come on the show, dude. Unbelievable player.
Yeah, J. Peter Robinson was also on synthesizer keyboards.
Whoa.
And Malando Gassama was the percussionist. Great percussionist from Africa, who I think ended up living in Sweden, and he's left the planet, unfortunately.
Yes.
But that was essentially the group that I played with on the road, and then I did a record called This Time with Al, produced by Jay Graydon, and then there was another artist. His name was Mark Jordan that I recorded with at that time, but I didn't tour with Mark.
How did you meet Al? I'm rest in peace. The man was just brilliant, man. How did you talk about it? Because that dude, he was. Well, I'm curious because he was. Maybe we talked about this last time, but he was playing at the Half Note with George Duke, John Hurd, Al Checky, then Pete Magadini when Alex Haley was writing the Roots book, and you were up there for a hot minute. Did you meet him then or no?
I might have met him there. I met all those other cats up there for sure.
I know.
But I remember Al being in L.A. and he was working at the Blah Blah Cafe and the Times restaurant.
Wow.
And I heard him there and I met him there, probably in the '70s. And then when Jay Graydon started producing him, Jay called me in to play on the record. So that's when I got a chance to work with Al, and then subsequently went on the road with him. And so
what made him kind of a musical genius? Do you think? Because he to me, I mean, I don't know his discography as well as I should, but he'd been doing it for so long, and he was a magical person. Can you talk a little bit about what he brought, especially in the live setting?
Well, he's such a great entertainer, number one. But, I think with Al, not only being a great singer, but he's a drummer in his body, in his mind. He's a drummer. He can probably outdo any drummer by just singing the sounds that he came up with. His rhythmic sense was incredible. It just came from his soul. He was one of those guys that had natural ability, and so much fun to play with. I can tell you a story. You think about working with a singer, and singers can be challenging and difficult, and they need to have the things the way they need to have them.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm working with Al in the studio, and we're working on a track called Alonzo, which is on an album called This Time. And it's a 6/8, and Jay Graydon was producing, and pretty much the record was very, very carefully produced. But this track, which was one of the last tracks we did, was not really produced. We kind of like put it together in the studio. Abraham Laboriel on bass, I think Michael Omardian on keyboards, and myself, and I can't remember. I think Jay might have played on it, and Al. So we're in the studio rehearsing the tune, and there's a bridge section in the tune, and I came up with a beat that that was not a regular beat.
Right.
So we stopped, and Al said, I'm kind of having a problem playing with the beat that you're playing. And I said, Al, I'll be happy to change it. He said, no, don't change it. Let me learn how to play with it. And he did. And it's a great, first of all, the track is really, really
Alonzo?
Alonzo.
Oh, I got to check it out immediately.
You got to check it out. It's the most creative track on the record because it came from the guys in the studio.
It came from the soul. It came from the exact. See, I love that's. So this is a perfect example. Like you said, it was a very meticulously sort of crafted album.
Yes.
And so that can. So then you had this opportunity to sort of. What you're basically saying is Al was like, I'm going to fit myself into what you're playing.
I'm going to learn how to sing with what you're playing because I like it. Even though it's a little bit different. You know, how many singers would do that? You know, you'd have to accommodate them. But they said, I'm having a problem. And you say, okay, I can simplify. I'll just
right,
whatever.
Right. I'll placate to you. Yeah, no, this was more like, hey, I dig it. I want to try to figure it out.
I know that was Al. So in other words, he wasn't afraid of trying new things, of learning to adapt to something. He was so fun to work with. His time is incredible. I can't tell you enough about how much I really love playing with him.
Yeah, I mean, really, this popped into my head too. When my favorite era of Zappa is when you're in the band, and my favorite synthesizer is those early Moog synthesizers that George had.
Yeah.
What was Frank's attitude towards synthetic music, or in bringing that into? I don't know when you stopped working with him. I mean, he made albums well into the '80s, and I don't think you were in those bands. But
no.
What was when? I mean, you were working with Yamaha in the mid '70s with that stuff. So what was Frank's take on synthetic instrumentation?
Well, I don't know what attitude he had about it. I don't think he was ever bothered by what George did with the Moog or the Oberheim or whatever he was using. And it really, to me, it fit very well. Some of the
dude, those early ones are that early Moog, man.
Yeah,
the sounds on that is incredible.
And George really knew how to work it.
Yeah,
he really had the ability to know what to do with it to fit Frank's music. So I think that Frank I don't ever recall him saying something to George about, well, you don't do that, or, it's the wrong place for it, or whatever.
This is an unholy thing. Yeah, no, there was nothing like that. Yeah.
No. And so, and George, to me, he had total freedom to create, whatever effect or sounds or, whatever he wanted to do. A lot of people think that Frank was very specific and told everybody what to play and whatnot, but that's not the truth. I mean, yeah, he had charts that you had to play, note for note, but then there were tunes where there were no charts. And so he may had he certainly knew how he wanted to lay out the track, to lay out the song, but as far as what you did on the song, that was up to you.
Is there an Alonzo song from the Zappa times that you can point to where, like you said, where there was some freedom and you made up a beat and he was like, because I mean, it wasn't like he was going to shy away from if you came up with something creative.
Well, for example, a track like Big Swift, not Big Swifty, no, Uncle Me.
Mm.
That track was, first of all, it was one of my favorite pieces that he ever wrote.
Definitely.
But second of all, I chose to play that in a certain way where sometimes I'd be playing time and sometimes I would be playing what they were playing or supporting what they were playing. So I acted like a percussionist basically on the drum set.
Interesting.
But there were also drum fills and things like that I would play, and then unison lines that I would play. And Frank never said to me, "Play something different." And so I always took it to think that, well, what I'm doing is working, so I'm not going to change it. And from night to night, I could change my fill. I could maybe change up a few things, and not drastically change the effect that I was creating. But there was always freedom in just about everything, especially with fills. Um, um, but I can't think of maybe a specific song where I had total freedom. Although take the track Redunzel, which is a fast 3.
Yes.
I basically just played it like a bebop tune, in a fast 3.
Right.
And yeah, there were parts where I'd play unison with everybody, but at the same time, backing a soloist or whatever, I just play. So
yeah, no. How did you work with Ruth? She was the only percussionist she wasn't even a percussionist, but like, how do you learn to not train your ears, but get your ears to really focus on what your job is and not get distracted? There's just so much rhythm and melodic stuff, especially in that original band. I mean, I know you had years of shedding and bandstand experience, but I just maybe talk to younger drummers or even myself at times, because I have a tendency to play in unison with people and drift away from keeping time in my own little way. I'm not a professional by any means.
Sure.
How have you learned, or what would be some of the ways that you have sort of disciplined yourself where, yeah, you might play time and you might be playing unison, but it feels good and it works. It's not just a mess.
Well, I've always felt that I had a good ability to figure out what the music was going to require from me. Should I play straight time? Should I just lay it down and let everything else happen? Or can I get myself in the mix and get involved a little bit more? So I'm able to sort of figure out how to do that. And with Frank, of course, it really sort of brought all that to fruition when I was, but it started in Don Ellis's band, I got to say. But with Frank, again, I always like to play what the music is requiring of me from what I'm thinking. And then if they say something different, then okay, great, I'll do something different. But I pride myself in being able to provide what I think is the right thing for the music. So if it requires playing some unison here and maybe playing a contrasting rhythm as opposed to duplicating what I'm hearing, or just keep the time simple, keep it straight ahead, and let everybody else do their thing.
I love it.
That's kind of how I.
Was there ever a period where you were really having to? I mean, you're always listening, but with Don Ellis, was there a learning curve with that? Just because there was so much.
Tell me about it.
There was so much conversation. Can you talk about that, like how you learn over time to get to a place of stillness, or not, or just like where it kind of you didn't have to think about it anymore. It just was part of the flow.
Well, that's a learning process for sure. And when I joined Don, I was 24, and before that, my experiences were playing with Dick Crest and that whole situation in college with the big bands and percussion ensemble, etc., and then jamming with my friends and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then listening to a lot of music at that time, and I was totally enthralled with the Miles Davis Quintet, 63 to 68. That was
every album during
that was my go-to stuff.
Yeah, man.
Along with everything else that was great at that time, and there was so much of it. And I was hanging with musicians with Don Ellis who were older than me, and they were turning me on to a lot of things. And so I got a lot of listening experience as I was developing as a player. And then getting the chance to play with Don starting in 1968. And this is, I was just getting out of college at San Jose State. And like I said, I immediately moved to LA to join the band and had to continue my studies at Cal State Northridge because, the draft was over my head and I had to stay in school.
That's right. This was also this was you enrolled there after you played at Dante's and he hired you. Remember he let you sit in there, right? Yes,
exactly. Okay, I sat in with Dante's. He hired me, and I moved to LA a month later and immediately enrolled in college. Mm-hmm. And then a month later, I think Don went on the road. I don't know how. I forget how I worked it out where I stayed in school and still went on the road.
Yeah, you're like, it was very common. Like, I got to go on tour, man.
I know.
So cool.
But playing with Don and learning sort of on the job, but at the same time, having Don help me out with understanding his concepts and then just playing and learning how to play in 5 and 7 and 9 and 13 and God knows what else. And so doing all of that gave me the chops to be able to handle something like Frank Zappa and not be fearful of failing.
I love this. Wait, hold on. I want to be clear. Was Ellis's concept? I think you said this last time. I never heard anybody say it was basically fusing jazz with with Indian music. Is that basically as simple?
That's basically what.
And that's what he told you. That was his concept.
That was his concept.
Oh my,
he was studying.
That's not too daunting. I mean, that's insane, man.
Well, I mean, it was a first, and when his first record came out in 1965, I believe, live in Monterey, the band instructor at San Jose State turned the band on to that record, and we were totally enthralled with something that we had never heard of before, and it was so exciting and so challenging. And then, after he tells us that and plays that for us, he says, "By the way, I'm bringing Don to play with our band." And so that put me right into, I got to hear everything that's going on with Don. And so I did, and I learned just by listening a lot of the material. And so that's why I was able to play the rehearsal as well as I did, because I was somewhat familiar with what the tunes sounded like. I was reading them for the first time. But again, my reading skills were good, so I was able to get through that. But the concept that I had to learn through reading was Don tended to write cyclically as opposed to metrically, or a combination of both, which means if it's in 5/4, the rhythm might be 3/3/2/2. Mm-hmm. And so you'd see both the 5/4 and the 3/3/2/2 at the same time. And so he encouraged me to listen to the cycle, get used to the cycle, forget about the fact that it's 5. If you play the cycle, you're in 5.
Right. I love it. Oh my
so that's where I learned about all that stuff. And then I did do a little bit of further education with Hari Harao, who was a tablaist living in Pasadena.
You need to stop right there, dude. That was Ravi's teacher.
Well,
it was one of Ravi, because Emil just came into my consciousness just now. Yeah, and by the way, Emil Richards, to his credit as a leader, was doing some really hip stuff alongside Don.
Well, there was some consecutive things that were going on with Emil and Roger Kellaway and Tom Scott and John Garrett and Chuck DeMonico and Mike Lang and others. Emil, Joe Porcaro, they were all sort of getting into this thing. Joe was with Don before me, and so Joe helped me out as well.
Joe Porcaro.
Oh,
so cool.
Yeah, I actually took Joe's place as second drummer in the band before I became first drummer. And so I met Joe right away when I moved to LA. And of course, we've had a long association.
I'm thinking Emil he did an album with Francisco Aguabella and Al McKibben. I mean, they were way outs. I mean, it was like
Francisco. Yes.
I mean, he was also Emil was like an odd time freak. So go ahead. Francisco was amazing, man.
Well, I played with Francisco during that time, and yeah, I realized, wow, here's a percussionist that understands this stuff.
Yeah.
He can play odd meters. Where did he learn that? His culture didn't teach him that because it's not in his culture. The Afro-Cuban music is not in 5/4. So he was a brilliant percussionist, and I really enjoyed playing with him. And I did do a lot of playing with Emil at the time. If Joe was mainly his drummer, but if Joe couldn't make it, Emil would call me to play, or John Guerin, or at the time Steve Bohannon. And Steve was in the Hindustani Jazz Sextet, which was Don's group. And
go back to Hari Harao for a minute. So this cat, because Emil, it's in one of my books. He was talking about it was either a peer or incredibly close with Ravi.
Well, I'm sure there's a connection there. Absolutely. Yeah. So Hari taught me some of the concepts, taught me how to count, to think about odd groupings, and
how many? Seriously, how many? That can you just talk about those lessons? I mean, that must have been really intense, man. I mean, because
I'm trying to conjure up the memory now that that I don't have much.
You know what it is? Maybe more to the point. Like, was there not a lot of talking and just a lot of playing and a lot of feel?
There was talking. There was instruction. There was, he knew that I was playing with Don and knew that I had I needed to be a quick learner. So I was learning the essentials. I wasn't going too deep into it, but I was learning the essentials so that I could I could play Don's music.
Mm-hmm.
And then once playing Don's music, I realized how important all these concepts were and how they worked and how I could utilize them. and that was because of all that a book came out called Even in the Odds in 1980, which is basically everything that I learned from 1968 to 1980.
I'm sorry, you wrote the book?
I
need to know. Wait, I'm sorry. Even
in the odds.
This is unbelievable. So you wrote a book about this entire thing.
I wrote a book because I mean, yes, Joe Procara had written a book called Odd Times before then, but I went further because I really took all of my Don Ellis experiences and began to write them down in the bus primarily. So I was writing constantly. Ralph,
this just came in. You said you learned a lot of his stuff when your professor was like, "Hey, he's coming to the college," and you said you listened to it. You learned it by ear, and you had good reading chops, so you read the charts. I'm just asking you to sort of pontificate here. In this age of visualization, we are so ensconced with. I can look up Ralph Humphrey and watch you play with Zappa or anybody, and I can just over and over. Do you think you could have learned it as well as you did if you were just inculcated with visual information? I mean, it was still an auditory time. To me, that was why the music kept expanding so much, because everybody was learning by ear. I mean, let's face it. I mean, there were some TVs around, but I mean, there was no, it wasn't like you were like able to just have a fetish and just watch and watch. How much of that learning came, how much of that listening do you think accounted for this incredible expansion of concept and vocabulary?
I think 100% audio. It was a time when you would.
And maybe the better question is why? What in your mind? Why is that? Because
you're right about the visualization. Most everything. In fact, when sometimes an engineer is looking more at the needles
exactly
rather than listening. So to me, listening is everything for a musician. If you should be able to listen and determine what's going on rather than having to see it. How do you see music? You can see people play music.
Exactly.
But you got to listen to what you're hearing. And so I think the fact that we didn't have the tools that people have now, we were forced to learn by listening. And so, when you bought a record and you took it home and you put it on the first side, sat down, listened to it, turned it over, listened to it again, read all the liner notes, see who played on this.
Right.
Why is that tenor saxophone so great? Oh, it's so and so, and listening to the drummer and just appreciating the audio quality of and the performance of these musicians, most of which were, go into the studio, let's record, roll tape. Thank you. Next.
Done.
Thank you. Next.
Done. One take. Done.
There wasn't a lot of production like there is today.
Yeah, because if it felt good and there wasn't like a horrendous clam, it was like, good, let's move on.
And even with clams,
right?
Like clams and everything during that period, but it didn't matter. Mistakes happen. And
did you have at least early on with Bohannon, or even when you became the #1 drummer, if you were on a tour with Don, would you have a tendency to want to listen back to the show that night or the day after? Would you listen to it?
Well, if it was recorded, absolutely.
Yeah.
We did that constantly with Frank.
Really? So with Zach, and on the bus, or like the group would all listen, or you just?
Well, we'd get the board tape after the show.
I love this.
I don't think Frank listened to it, but
everybody else was listening intently.
We would get together in a room and listen to what we just did, because we all knew that there were some fantastic things that happened.
Damn.
And the one thing was, Frank was so brilliant night after night with his monologues. that was part of why we wanted to listen.
Exactly, dude. It was like stand-up comedy.
Frank put on a show every night. He was just brilliant, And then I like to listen to how I was sounding in the band. Was I doing the things that I thought I was the right thing to do, And if not, I would change it, So I was using the tapes to learn about my position in the band.
Again, an auditory experience.
Because
I just feel like if somebody was looking at Don, if somebody was visualizing Don Ellis's music, it would be a disaster. And then to add to that, the auditory thing, you'd listen to the records, the liner notes. Some people would say, "How is that cat doing that?" And then you'd call Hari Harau or somebody and get a lesson. That, and then you'd figure it out. But it was like, it sounds so simple. And yet with all this technology today, and not just the visual material, but we're saturated with so much mediocrity. Don Ellis's music would not have been released to the public unless it met a certain bar. Frank Zappa's music. Now we're being, so it's not just that we're inculcated with visual information. It's that information is incredibly mediocre or subpar. And these are major issues. And you're not somebody who's nobody's equipped to solve them, but I mean, it can be a little bit demoralizing to a degree.
Well, it maybe is one reason why I didn't listen to the Grammys last night. I knew what to expect, and most of it I would have gone, this is not for me. No. It's just not for me at all. And they would list, here's who won the jazz category, and here's. But yeah,
right. It's all in so much. It's so manufactured. It's not. Well, I got another name that voice for you, and then we'll listen to the content, and then we'll come back.
Okay.
We were listening to Miles Davis and Tony Williams and Elvin Jones and John Coltrane obsessively, like all day and all night. For 4 years, there was almost no other music.
Right.
But because of the money and the audiences they were trying to get us, they were starting to have rock and roll bands. Muddy Waters and those guys came out and did Newport, where they did a festival out in California. I forget which one, a jazz festival. And now they're starting to have rock bands. Those guys were blues, but then so the clubs were, even jazz clubs were asking, can you play some boogaloo? Can you play this, play that? So we didn't want to play straight funk like you heard on the radio, because we were jazz musicians. We could improvise, play changes, swing, and do all this stuff. So we right away married the two things together. It was just, nobody ever said to do it that way. As soon as, like, maybe we played ahead of Mercy Mercy, and when the guy would go into his piano or saxophone solo, we'd start blowing. It just seemed like we weren't going to play straight time. There was no singer to back up or anything,
Exactly.
So then a group, the Fourth Way, with Eddie Marshall and Mike Knott, came up around that area. Paul and I were getting very popular, and we were infiltrating all kinds of bands with our type of rhythm and understanding. And I was listening to Elvin and Tony and Philly Joe. Now he sings, now he sobs with Chick Corea, Miroslav and Roy Haynes. Just whatever, every record that came out was huge. Then Lenny White, a friend of mine, who was a dear friend of mine, did Red Clay.
Of course.
And right after that, I started subbing with Bobby Hutcherson and Woody Shaw when he couldn't make it, so I subbed for him on those gigs. And I got Paul on those gigs as an upright bass player. So all of that stuff was starting to blend without anybody ever. We never verbalized it. Nobody said, get funky. The term, let's play some funk, that nobody ever said, let's play some funk. They would say, I made a mistake there, they would say, let's get funky on this one, but funk was not a genre yet. Nobody said, let's play some funk. You didn't hear talk like that.
Well, not the best audio on that, but do you have any idea, do you recognize that voice at all?
I don't recognize the voice.
So that he referenced Paul. That was Paul Jackson, and so that interview was with Mike Clark, the drummer from.
That's Mike Clark.
That's Mike. Yeah.
And it didn't sound like him.
Because it was not the. It was. I did it in my classroom like 12 years ago. Not the. But Mike has been. I mean, he's such a beautiful cat, and he was. The dude was making a living playing jazz gigs. I mean, in Oakland, when Herbie came to him and was like, "Can you can play this music, this Headhunters music. You want to go on the road?" The bread was really bad, and Mike was conflicted because he was actually making good dough playing with Vince Guaraldi and all this jazz. There's really no. I don't necessarily have a question. I loved what he was saying about the idea that there was no music. Like there was no. It wasn't like, oh yeah, Ralph Humphreys is in a funk band. There was no funk. There was no It was not in the lexicon, But yet there were tunes that lent itself to compared to what Les McCann and Eddie Harris or some of those Jazz Crusaders tunes. I just wonder about like. Did you get to see that Headhunters band? Did you ever? I mean, can you talk a little bit about, sort of? I mean, Herbie's record, that one. Even though Harvey Mason's the drummer on that original Herbie record,
right?
That was one of the most popular crossover records ever.
Yeah.
And I just wondered. I wanted to know how you dealt with, because I mean, you were right in that milieu, not necessarily playing that kind of music, but kind of,
Well, I Don had a lot of straight eighth note music, and some of it was groove oriented. Call it funk or whatever you want to call it, but I was, like Mike Clark, I was a jazzer, and I met Mark and Paul, and those guys.
You did get to you saw them in Oakland, or did you?
Yeah.
I got, because they were in a group called like Group Therapy. I mean, they were Jack London Square. Like I think you might be down in there.
I hung with them. I didn't go out and hear them play. I just hung with them, and I was always enthralled with Mike's approach to what we now call funk, or linear or whatever you want to call it. And I knew I couldn't do it. I didn't have that. Didn't have those chops, and his time was so cool, and he had such great ideas and whatnot. But we would hang out and share ideas and whatnot because we liked listening to the same music. And Vince Denham was sort of a.
Oh, I've interviewed Vince. Did you, because they were doing some really experimental, and Paul and before Herbie.
Yeah, and so Vince kind of brought us together. And
oh, really? Vince was. You were okay. That's what it was. Yeah, Vince told me about you too. Go ahead, continue.
Well, yeah, Vince and I are old friends.
Exactly.
Yeah. We were first together, basically. But I wasn't doing that kind of stuff, and Mike is such a great jazz player, and he brings that sensibility into his sort of funky thing, and it works,
Did you? I mean, looking back on it, just because things weren't so geared towards like labeling of music.
Yeah.
At the time, did you, or only now do you realize how much freedom you had, or at that time was it unbridled as well? Because the micro now, like you said, play something that is more danceable, or you're constantly having to choreograph this stuff, or that's the issue, is that it's about pleasing the audience. But the conundrum is, as I've learned, musicians can't please the audience unless they're getting off themselves. So if you're that's the problem, right? You guys, nobody was telling you so you guys were getting off, and therefore the audience was getting off. But now it's like you have to placate to some, audience, and that becomes a very sterile performance.
I think that's the big mistake that we make. Why would you expect an audience not to appreciate musicians who are getting off?
Dumbing down, like you said. Unbelievable, man.
But why are we dumbing down? Because it's stupid. Play the music. If the music is good, the people are going to get into it, and they're going to love it, whatever
exactly.
It is.
Do you have any gigs coming up? I mean, I sure would love to see you on the bandstand at some point. I mean, for what it's worth, I'm taking precautions, vaccinations and stuff, but I am fully turning the corner as it relates to live music. And I just would love to come, even if you're not, I'd love to come visit you, when I'm out in LA,
I've been, of course, ensconced here at home.
Sure.
Because of COVID and all that. I'm really beginning to think about, getting to LA and doing something down there. I know that I have, there's a music festival up here in Mendocino called the Mendocino Music Festival. And I'm bringing up, including myself, a quartet, to play a couple of concerts for that, including Mitch Foreman, Cherry Watts, and Jimmy McLeese. I'm sorry,
when is that going to be?
That's going to be in mid-July.
Beautiful, man. I'm there, dude.
Yeah, come on.
Mendocino. So is it all music? I mean, I hate labels, but it's
all music. It's classical music.
Okay.
It's jazz.
Beautiful.
It can be rock and roll. It can be blues. It can be any kind of music.
Yeah, I dig.
But it's all good. So it's a mixture of all sorts of things. And of course, there's a symphony orchestra who's going to play some really nice stuff. There's a big band that I'm going to play in. Most of the cats come from San Francisco. I'm bringing up the same guys. We're going to play in the big band. And we're going to play, Kim Nally's going to sing. So we're going to do her, stuff that features her.
Maybe throw a Don Ellis tune in there.
Probably not. Probably not. So yeah, I will be busy during that time, but I am really thinking about coming to LA and playing with some guys down there.
We need you, Dad. We need you, man. We need the pulse. We need the heartbeat,
I miss it. I really, really miss it.
Yeah, I think you're in the boat with a lot. I mean, I just feel like, in some ways, this is kind of with all the carnage and trauma, in some ways, it's been for musicians, especially cats, the elders, it's been a blessing in disguise, just because nobody really saw this coming. And so you lost kind of the ability to sort of pick and choose what you may have wanted to do. And now you're kind of like a kid, kind of almost youthful again, where it's like, hey, let's do stuff that we would never have done before,
Yeah, well, I'm thinking that, and I've also trying to have an online image. I'm putting out some videos. I don't know if you've seen any of them, but
a couple,
mainly instructive in videos for drummers and for anybody who's interested. And I'm developing a sort of a master class kind of concept that I want to put out.
Before I let you go, this is the question I want to wrap set 2 with. Is I've been on this trip asking, John Schofield about Sonny Chirac, or basically the Eilers and the Sheps and the free movement versus cats that were definitely stretching the boundaries but playing more traditional jazz as opposed to just playing free. Who was the most free drummer that you ever enjoyed? And I'm talking like Sonny Murray, Beaver Harris. Maybe there were some cats in the Bay Area that I wasn't familiar. Was there a cat that was complete. I mean, I'm just getting hip to Milford Graves. I don't know how much you've watched it, or I mean, that stuff is kind of almost, it's too much for me right now. But still, it's just like tour de force. And the bottom line is, I just interviewed Peter Erskine, and he's like, Milford Graves was a timbalero in Spanish Harlem. You have to have impeccable time. So the idea is like taking that and saying, okay, enough of the tradition. I'm just going to go and burn. Anyone like that come to mind for you?
Well, I got to put Tony Williams in that category.
Wow. Interesting, man. Yeah, no, the Ego, that album Ego.
All of it, even with Miles in 67, 68, some of the stuff he was doing, no other drummer was doing that. Taking what we call timekeeping and changing the texture, changing the information, playing roles and things like that.
Right.
The way he interspersed his ideas with the other players. To me, he's one of the first drummers that really started taking this sort of freer idea about timekeeping and bringing it into the music. As far as other drummers, I mean, I'm in love with Tony. I'm also in love with Jack DeJohnette.
Yeah, I was thinking about Jack.
Jack also. How do you explain what he's doing? It's very hard to explain.
It's almost cyclical, like you were talking about. It's unbelievably just constantly
moving. It's not repetitive.
No.
It's over the bar line. It's constantly rolling. It's like his playing is like rocks rolling down a hill.
It must have something to do with his background as a piano player. Apparently, he's a pretty badass piano player.
He is. Yeah. He is. Plus other instruments, and he studied other cultures in the world too, and he's a brilliant man, and I just love how he plays the drums. But I can't explain what he's doing.
You just picked out two of the icons of the music. Was there a cat that you used to go to in San Francisco? There were guys like hole in the wall, the guys that never really made it per se. But was there ever a cat like unsung, off the beaten path? Maybe he didn't play free, but he was just somebody you were just like, I remember interviewing David Margan, who played bass with Santana, and he was in Oakland playing with this guy Fatfoot. They called him Fatfoot, and big dude, and he had a stuttering problem. And David loved this guy so much that he started to stutter. to be it's like, but were there, like, I know Philip Wilson was up there. Philip Wilson was up in the Bay Area for a minute. He played with Jock Ellis. I'm just wondering if there was ever a guy, maybe just, Talk with the Spirits, a guy that you used to go check out because you were just like, that dude is playing Otherworld.
I'm trying to think if there's anybody that did that for me. I remember going to see Rufus Jones with Count Basie.
Wow, Rufus,
a band that I absolutely loved. And I was familiar with Vince Ladiano.
Oh my dude! See that Mike Clark would say that Vince was the greatest, the best man. Played with. I think he had a broken arm one time. Played with one arm.
That's right. Played with one arm. Go figure.
Dude,
yeah.
Vince, man, holy cow! Yeah, see, that's what I'm talking about.
But believe it or not, there was a drummer in my high school.
Huh.
His name was Lynn Alexander.
Whoa.
And I can't tell you what happened to Lynn, but I do remember being awestruck with his approach. That to me was like, I want to play like that, and I can't explain what it was about, but it certainly had to do with feel.
Yeah,
his feel was just so incredible, that's
what I was talking about. That to me, that's the magic, where it's like it's not quantifiable, it just feels so good, and you want to be like that, and there were just it was just this. It's, and it carries on. And I think, to be honest with you, if you take a little bit, there's a chance in everything you do, but you put yourself back out in the live setting, Ralph, and I think that you'll be able to affect younger cats in the same way. And where they can say, wow, I'm inspired by that simplicity, or I'm inspired by that feel, or whatever, and I think that, yeah, I think that you guys are needed more than ever now. So it's really, I mean, it's always an honor to connect with you, but I hope that more cats from your generation feel the same way. And I really wish there was still a thriving live music scene where there was a lot of clubs and venues, but we do what we can do.
Well, I'm always checking out Tom Meek's post every week as what's going on in LA, and I'm seeing names that I've never heard of before, drummers that I've never heard of before, and I would really like to get a chance to hear them.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure they're doing great things, and there's a lot of drummers out there that I really, really enjoy. The whatever generation you want to call them, I guess the 30 to 40-year-olds, that are just killing and playing stuff that I couldn't even touch. So I'm really appreciating the sort of new stylistic approach in drumming. It's and everything that's happened before them is affecting what they're doing. And there's always this thing where you want to do something different than what just happened.
Absolutely.
That's always going to happen. So we're going to always hear new stuff coming from guys. And I'm always, digging what they're doing. That's what keeps music going,
Amen, man. I'm about to hit the road to the Bay Area to go and just get rid of all sorts of, and just have a ball with Circles Around the Sun, which is a phenomenal group of, it's all instrumental music, and you would dig them a lot. They're really cool cats. Circles Around the Sun.
Have they recorded?
A lot, yeah.
And who's in that band?
Well, it was the current incarnation is John Lee Shannon on lead guitar, Adam McDougall on keyboards. He also plays that original Jan Hammer Moog. And then Dan Horn is an amazing bass player. Plays the alembic electric bass. And Mark Levy, phenomenal drummer. Studied with Rockalon Bob Moses at New England Conservatory. And it was really, so it's a quartet. And it's just they go for it, and they're my peers, and they're not pretending to be wonkish jazzers. They're not. Mark is actually, but they're all really talented, and they're cool.
Another name came to mind when you were asking me about drummers in the Bay Area. George Marsh.
I'm so glad, dude. Marsh is first of all, it was his birthday the other day. He's a dear friend of mine. Mike Clark said that he would go to the Pierce Street Annex and see Denny Zeitlin and Marsh and Mel Graves playing this rock music. It was wild, man. This is '67 before anything, Marsh, genius drummer, man.
He has a concept that I've really always enjoyed, and his touch is so incredible, and the stuff he's done with Denny Zeitlin, just the two of them. Really, really remarkable music,
I'm so glad you brought him up, man. I'm going to go see him in Santa Rosa when I'm up there this week. So
he lives in Santa Rosa now?
He does.
Well, that's only a couple hours away from me.
You should, yeah. I mean, he is so jumping at the bit. I mean, he's playing at an all-time. I mean, like you, he's been sort of ensconced at home, but his playing is just inventive and ridiculous and sharp, and if you want to, I'll toss you his number if you want to get in touch with him.
Yeah, please do that.
I will.
Yeah,
Ralph, it's so good to hear you, man, and see you. I'll do my darndest to get to that Mendocino Jazz Fest, baby.
Yeah,
or that music fest.
Come on up.
All right, yeah, and keep swinging, be safe, and just play your part and do your thing.
I shall.
All right.
And thank you again, Jake.
Always, man. Be cool.
Okay, you too.
Later. Bye. Always a treat to talk to Ralph Humphrey, hitting the road, going to see Circles Around the Sun, and George Marsh. That's it for the Jake Feinberg Show. We will see you